Hey everyone, in this video, we're going to be doing another API deep dive into the Stripe Tax API. And today we're going to be talking about transactions and reversals. And my friend Alex is back again, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about how these things work. So, Alex, why don't we start off first with transactions? From a developer perspective, or from an API perspective, rather, like what is a transaction object and why should I care about it as someone that's building stuff with the Stripe Tax API?
As we mentioned in the previous video about the calculations, the calculation transaction API, it is wholly separated from the payment processing. So in this case, we do not have any knowledge about the money that is actually being moved or any of the tax obligations that you incurred. So the transaction API basically provides the way for you to declare within the Stripe system that you have actually collected certain order, right? Or you have actually committed certain calculations, so to speak, right? And you actually went forward with it. Or within reversals, that actually you did a refund and you emitted some of the money back to the customer. So your tax obligations in total are actually smaller than they were.
So I can think about this as essentially I'm just doing accounting, right? I'm just recording transactions, right? Like the actual transaction object has nothing to do with me actually moving money. Like it doesn't trigger anything of the sort. It's just saying, okay, well, this happened. This is the amount that you collected. This is how much taxes that are associated with it. These are the reasons why the taxes were collected. And then now we're just storing those inside of our Stripe account, essentially.
Yes.
All right, that sounds pretty straightforward. Do you have a demo or anything that we could take a look at to see how that works?
Yeah, that's it.
All right, so I'm looking at your screen now, and this looks like a very familiar demo that we ran through inside of your browser.
Everything is similar because to commit a transaction, you need to first create a calculation, what we already discussed in the previous video, right? And in this particular case, everything that we are going to be doing is encapsulated in the single button, the buy button. Now, to clarify, right, we did calculate taxes using the customer address that we have in our Stripe account that is based out of Florida. And this is the view of the taxes and the total amount that we, want to collect, right? And when the buy button is pressed, the customer is supposed to go through the checkout experience of your choice, and you create the tax transaction. So we can just click on it to see how it is. Right. So in this case, right, again, no money movement occurred here. For demonstration purposes, we just assume the customer actually checked out with this order, right? And the thing to point out here is that this $30 plus 1.68 in tax, right? This is just recorded as is based on the calculation that we did before.
So now that I have these transaction objects stored in my account, like what are some of the use cases that customers could do with these things?
Yeah, so these tax transactions, right, they're usually not that visible to the end customers. They're mostly for you as in like a business merchant, right, to generate the tax reports and prepare for filing with the specific government entity.
So then if I need to, like you said, generate tax reports, or maybe I'm doing some type of back office type work, right? Like I can pull this type of information up and I could read through and see exactly what happened as I inspect through these different, transactions that were recorded.
Yeah. Luckily, if you're using tax transactions, and for most of the places, we provide the location reports or the itemized exports in other locations, right? Where if you just navigate to the Stripe dashboard, you will find the location reports available there. So you don't need to perform any, in most cases, aggregations on your side, right? We will figure out that, for instance, for this specific transaction, right, that we created for this specific calculation, right, that it was based in Florida, right? The taxes were collected in Florida. So in the US Florida location report, you will actually see this $30 plus $1.68 for taxes collected.
And kind of like what we mentioned in the previous video, but I think it's worth saying again, this is mainly a use case of when you use this taxation, this transaction object, is when you're doing custom integrations. If you're doing anything with like hosted invoices, hosted checkouts, subscriptions, our hosted subscriptions, payment links, those types of things, a lot of this stuff already happens for you, right? And so you wouldn't have to go down to the level of creating calculation objects or creating transactions objects. Like that's just kind of handled. But for custom integration scenarios, like this is a use case of where you might want to use something like this. Is that correct, Alex?
Yes, that is exactly the case. And in fact, if you think about checkout sessions, invoices, all of the things like that, if you know about those, you're likely already familiar with some of the things that I mentioned before in the reports, right? Because the transactions that you create using the tax API are actually available in the same exact location reports as your checkout sessions or invoices. The tax transactions created for those are available there. It's just that they're managed by Stripe instead of yourself.
Nice. Well, why don't we take a look and see an example of how you actually use this in code? Because, I can imagine, there's APIs and things of that nature that we could call from the tax API. All right. So we're looking at Visual Studio Code now, and we're inside of a Python application, right?
Yes. So presumably, right, this is your server, and presumably, again, you're handling the post-payment activity, right? Or in the case of invoices, this would be on the invoice submission. All you need to do to actually create the transaction is to call one function, which is create from calculation. And there are just two inputs for this one, the calculation itself. So the original calculation, which we talked about more in the previous video, and the reference.
Now, are there other ways that we can create these transaction objects other than from using a calculation, or is this the main way that we do that?
This is the main way to do that right now.
Okay. And then I also notice, as I'm taking a look at line 171, you also have something called a reference. Like, what is that used for exactly?
Yeah. So this reference is a way for you to identify this tax transaction, like after a while when you're preparing for filing or auditing, or if you're trying to figure out in the location report or whatever what this tax transaction was created for, right? The reference will help you there. This is a globally unique identifier that you can provide to reference back into your system. So for the purpose of this demo, this is the order ID, imaginary ID of the card for which the payment occurred, for which this transaction will occur. And in case you're doing some shipping, for which any shipping would occur, or things like that.
So it's almost like a reference to, well, obviously it's a reference, but it's almost like a link between, like you said, like the actual payment that happened, right? The order that happened to the transaction that's calculated here in tax. So I'm looking at reports, I'm doing some back office work. I want to know how things flowed from one side to the other side. I could use this reference information to kind of work backwards or even forwards to kind of see, well, what was all involved, for this transaction to happen and for like these payments and these products to be sold.
You will have the view of the tax transactions for that specific reference. So in the reports, you will be able to see that, hey, for this specific order, what tax transaction was actually committed, or what refunds were committed for those.
Now, speaking of refunds, and I think that's a pretty good segue, what happens if I need to reverse a transaction, like reverse a tax transaction? Like what happens if I have to give my customers money back? Like how do we record that inside of this log essentially for our tax API?
Let's go back to the demo.
Yeah, let's do it.
And you might have noticed 3 large red buttons on the screen.
I do. And every time I see red buttons, I assume bad things are going to happen. button. So let's kind of slowly walk through each of them and let me know what bad things are going to happen when you press those red buttons.
Well, luckily there are no bad things that are going to happen, right? But these are to demonstrate 3 different types of refunds or reversals that you can do with your tax transaction in Stripe. Let's start with the most basic reversal type, which is the flat amount, right? And I'll just click on it and see what it does, right? So when you're performing the flat amount refund, you tell Stripe how much money did you actually refund the customer, right? And we, on our side, take this information. So, for instance, in this specific button click on flat amount refund, we send Stripe, hey, could you please refund $7.92, right? And Stripe did just that. It distributed the $7.92 across 3 line items that we have, or 3 items, so to speak, that we have, right? And it distributed it proportionally across non-taxable and taxable amounts. So you can see that all 3 line items have 2.5, give or take. And tax amounts are also different depending on the original tax amounts.
So I think very similar to transactions when we were talking about it before, as we actually execute these reversals, no refunds are actually happening, right? Like we're not actually moving money when, we carry out these methods. This is all just about logging and capturing essentially, the different events, so to speak, right, that have happened from a tax perspective. You know what I mean? So there are separate tax APIs specific for refunds that work as well. But again, in terms of like capturing these in a log that, again, you can use for tax reportings and things of that nature, like this would be something that you would use as well. And like you showed us, like those are 3 different options, 3 different modes that we can choose from, depending on how exactly we want to carry out these reversals.
Yeah.
So I see in the middle here, there's a button that says line items. Could you tell me a little bit about how is that one different from the other ones?
Okay, right. So the flat amount, you provide us with one single number. How much should you or did you refund? With the call to the line item level refunds, you provide the details for how should each specific line items be refunded. In this particular case, we refunded $5 of the first line item, and then for the other 2, we refunded 2.5 and 23 cents or 18 cents respectively from the rest of the line items.
So then what we're able to do then is we could provide those line items to the reversals API. And then now it could, in a very detailed way, go through each of those and calculate, the very specific amounts that need to get reversed.
Yes, this is the best way to summarize it. You provide details per line item in terms of tax or non-tax amounts, and we record them as is. Let's say when you were creating the certain refund, you made a mistake, right? For example, instead of refunding 5, you actually refunded 7 for the first line item, and you want to actually like remove that transaction from existence, right? So you cannot actually alter your tax ledger, and for audit purposes, you should always keep track of those things. The way to achieve this behavior of like, hey, I did a refund, it was not correct, something was wrong, or for example, if you emitted a refund and then it did not actually reach the customer at the end of the day, their bank closed, or they had issues during increasing the amount on their balance, anything like that, you can always fully reverse, cancel, so to speak, the tax transaction. Luckily for that, we do have, in our demo, we have a button for that, but you'll be able to achieve the same exact functionality with the API call to SDK. And in this case, you will see that this newly created transaction is fully reversing the original one. So it's kind of like an inverse tax transaction to, at the end of the day, make it so that this refund is 0. And The same applies to the previous refund that we made. We could just fully refund that. And if for some reasons your original sales transaction was actually incorrect and you want to submit a new one, you can also fully reverse that one as well.
So then for each of those three different modes that we have for creating like these reversals, just as easily as we could create them, like we could pull them back as well. So
Yes.
for whatever happens again in the back office, we could say, okay, well that didn't really need to happen, or we're not going to do this again with this customer, or this order was null and void, whatever the case is, right? Like we can make those types of decisions. But again, I want to keep harping on the fact that like this functionality that we're looking at is not actually moving money around. So I don't want folks to look at it and be like, how is he just moving and deleting and doing refunds so quickly? Like money is not moving here. This is just recording records in a log essentially that you could use for your reporting purposes. So, all right, Alex, can we look at the code now? Can we see how this stuff gets wired up together?
Sure.
So as I'm taking a look at what you have here, we can see like those three different modes, right? Like there's full, there's flat amounts, and then there's also partial at the bottom. So could you tell me a little bit about, for each of these, what are the things that were required, for instance, for the full mode to give to the API so it could calculate the reversal in the right way?
Top to bottom, the complexity kind of increases with each one of them, but they're still not very complicated. So to perform a full reversal, all you need to do is just provide the mode full, specify which original transaction you want to actually fully reverse, and provide a reference. And this reference has the same exact concept as what we discussed before with the sales transaction or transaction created from the calculation. This is just a way for you to identify why this tax transaction reversal happened. The other one is flat amount. For flat amount refund, so the refund for which you just specify amount that Stripe needs to record and distribute across all of the line items that you used, all you need to do is provide the mode partial, specify the original transaction that you want to refund, provide a reference, again, the same exact concept as before, and provide the actual amount in minor units that you want to declare in your system.
Gotcha.
The final one is the line item refund, or you saw it in the demo as line items, right? The reason for that is it's different from the flat amount refund only by the virtue of the fact that instead of providing the flat amount refund, so flat amount value, I should say, in minor units, you specify for each line item what value should be refunded.
So then depending on the one that we use, we have like these different options that we could supply it so it can make sure that, again, it has context, right? Like it has the information it needs to calculate the right amount of for the transaction reversal.
Correct. But for the final one, for the line items, we will just use the amount that you provide us. So we will perform no additional calculations. We will just use the amount that you wanted to refund.
So for that final mode on the screen, I'm assuming that the line items are just the same line items we had when we created the transaction in the first place. We're just passing them along to this reversal.
Yes, although the amounts will be different in those. So you can specify the amount that we need to record the refund for, or you specify the amount of tax that we need to reduce in the final view of the transaction.
So I really like how this API is laid out, and it makes taxes not feel as scary as I usually think that it is. And being able to calculate being able to capture these transactions and being able to use them later for reporting purposes and back office operations, I think can be really helpful for businesses. So Alex, thank you again for coming on. Really appreciate you. For folks that are watching, if you have any questions at all, if you want to learn some more about like the tax API and some of the things that it can do, definitely recommend you head over to our docs at stripe.com. Also, we have Discord channels and we're on YouTube, as you can imagine, and Twitter and all the social things. So feel free to reach out to us, ask us questions. We'd love to hear about what you're building with the Stripe Tax API, how you're using it in your applications. And if you have any feedback at all you want to share, definitely, please feel free to send it on. But thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.